has been locked out of something at some point in their life. We can all agree that's a really crappy feeling, right? You lose your keys to your car, your house, your apartment, you get really frustrated. But eventually, like, they turn up, or you call someone and they like unlock it for you and you're good to go. You can get back in. What has happened, and what happens a lot with athletes in particular, or really anyone that just has a one-dimensional identity of some sort, where only one thing defines them, when they lose that one thing, essentially physiologically or neurologically, we get locked out of being ourselves. We get locked out of being able to access those brain networks that help us feel like ourselves.
Welcome to Rise and Shine, the podcast where we dive deep into mindset and sport and learn more about athletes' stories. Today on the podcast, I am so excited to have Cory Camp, the founder of Forever Athlete, an organization that takes the meaning of being a former athlete and translates it into how do we live our lives post-athletics. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. Hi, Cory. Welcome to the Rise and Shine podcast.
Nat, what is up? Thank you for having me. This is so freaking cool to be having this conversation with you, and I'm just pumped to be here in my first Zoom meeting in the new apartment. So I'm excited.
I'm so glad that you got to move into a new space. You have such an open wall to create all sorts of cool things. And I just wanted to start out to kind of give everyone a little bit of background. So Cory and I swam together in college, and we went off, we did our own things, and we reconnected recently through Rise, but also through your company, Forever Athlete. So talk to me a little bit about, let's go back to like the college days, and you were a swimmer. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's why this conversation I'm so excited for. It's so cool to have this full circle 5+ years since swimming has wrapped up for me. And like the last time you and I sat down, we were like, I didn't think we would ever speak, after we left Delaware, and here we are. So I mean, long story short, Forever Athlete is the social support for athletes as they retire. Mainly because when swimming ended for me, found myself in a really dark place, found myself not really knowing where to go, who to talk to about how I was feeling, and really just kind of put that down, suppressed it, and didn't face it at all. I just said, I'm not really feeling like myself anymore, but if I keep doing what everyone else is telling me I should be doing, I'll be good. I'll be good until doing that for a year plus, and I was not good. I never got quote unquote better. And I really knew through my own podcast, actually, after 2+ years being retired, I was like, well, how can I stay around the sport that I loved, and sports in general? Well, I'll start a podcast. I'll sit down with these athletes. We'll have conversations about the mental side of performance. That was super cool. I was fascinated about that. And I kept sitting down with all these people, other ex-athletes, and what I found was they were struggling the same as I was up until that point. Some having been retired for 10, 20 years and still kind of trying to find their identity, trying to find their flow post-sport. And that was kind of when something clicked for me. I was like, I wonder if we start talking about this a little bit more, maybe we can have facilitated conversations. Maybe there's even like a room for coaching in this space. I don't know what that would look like, but I want to try it. And ended up deciding, fast forward, I worked so many odd jobs between graduating in 2017 to now. But with each of those, I pulled something away. It was like August 2020, decided to step away from all the regular job world and say, I'm going to start Forever Athlete, and it's going to be an online coaching platform. So I did that. And then my favorite part was come May 2021, I went to launch my group coaching for the 4th time, and no one signed up. It was crickets, nothing. I was like, what do I do now? And that was perfect. Honestly, I was obviously feeling a little bit defeated, but honestly, it was the perfect thing for me because I was able to pause, take a step back, and really reassess where did I want this company to go. As it was when it was online, just group coaching, it was me and the relationship with whoever I got to coach. But what I realized was I wanted to be able to set an example through my own life to create a brand that inspires other people to just go out and try new things, to find flow in different areas of their life that maybe they haven't thought of before. Have a little bit more fun on the day to day. Embrace a creative side. Talk to people that you want to talk to. And that was how we shifted then into community building. And it's been a slow uphill battle since then, but it's been great because I'm really getting settled now in Austin and starting to throw more consistent in-person community events. And now I'm just like seeing, I'm just scratching the surface. The sky's the limit from here.
That's awesome. Tell me a little bit. So you finished, swimming, and then you had those 2-year break, and then you started Forever Athlete. So tell me a little bit about, like, I want to dive deep into what were some of the things that you found, you talked about on podcasts, that people were feeling the same way.
Yeah.
Because there may be athletes listening that are like, wait, what is that same way? Talk a little bit about that, of how you were feeling during that time, and what really launched you into Forever Athlete.
I just felt disconnected. And I think every athlete has felt that way where just something feels off. Like you go to practice and you're like, you can't really quite put your finger on it, but it feels off. And what I noticed was for me, it wasn't like it's bound to happen to all of us, right? That you just feel off from time to time, day to day. That's normal. But what I was starting to feel was really off every single day. And it got to a point then where that manifested in, I mean, you remember me as probably this really skinny distance swimmer. I graduated at like 155, 160 if I was soaking wet. And before I knew it, I was 195 pounds a few months later after graduation. I told myself I was just bulking, quote unquote. I was lifting weights and eating still like a swimmer would swim. And I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, who the heck is this person? I don't recognize them. And what I found then was through research and just my own experiences and experimenting is everyone has been locked out of something at some point in their life. We can all agree that's a really crappy feeling, right? You lose your keys to your car, your house, your apartment, you get really frustrated. But eventually, like they turn up, or you call someone and they like unlock it for you and you're good to go. You can get back in. What has happened and what happens a lot with athletes in particular, or really anyone that just has a one-dimensional identity of some sort, where only one thing defines them, when they lose that one thing, essentially physiologically or neurologically, we get locked out of being ourselves. We get locked out of being able to access those brain networks that help us feel like ourselves. And that was exactly what happened to me. And that was exactly has happened to so many other athletes. So what do we do there? How do we create a key? And that was really where I started to stumble upon different things. Like for me, when things weren't going right, quote unquote, I decided to take a second, pause, listen to my intuition, listen to really what did my heart want to do in that moment. And it was wanting at the time to get back into swim coaching. Like I didn't really care anymore about the outward success. I took a second to pause and be like, all right, so yeah, it might not be the sexiest job title in the world, right? Like I'm not gonna meet someone and be like, yeah, I'm a swim coach. But I'm like, oh my God, that's like I grew up dreaming of being
Right.
that. So it took a hit to my ego for sure, but being able to do so really started to unlock this deeper ability to start really listening to my intuition. And that has what has allowed me from really like 2018 onwards to start just taking more time to pause and listen. What feedback am I getting from where I'm currently at? Okay, great. That's a flashlight for where I get to go next. Or that could be staying in the same thing or changing directions altogether. People look at my story and probably be like, oh, this dude just jumps around like crazy. It's like, oh, I just feel really called to go do this, and I'm gonna go do that. And we'll see what happens.
Right. It's the taking all of the opportunities that you have, right? And I do think it's interesting because you're told in college, like on a resume, you need a job that lasts this amount of time.
Yep.
And it's like, but if you're really listening to your true intuition and you're saying, hey, like I want to be a swim coach. I want to do this for some time, but then now I want to, impact, people who aren't athletes anymore. That's very different teaching technique versus coaching athletes who are retired, but in all it's the same too, right? Like
Yeah,
there are similarities that you see through that.
100%. And I take, it's funny. Sometimes I'll meet an older person. For example, I have a few clients that are mid 40s, right? And people might hear that and be like, well, what does a 27-year-old have to teach someone in their mid 40s?
Right.
And oftentimes, what I see when I'm working with these men and women is they take life so freaking seriously. So I take a page out of how did I used to coach the 8 and unders? They were like one of my favorite age groups because I could just show up, I could be so goofy and silly, and it was a blast. I take that same energy and I show up with like a 45-year-old who's complaining about some problem that their startup that they created and they're really frustrated. It's like, hey, like let's kind of like dumb it down, laugh about it, and then find a solution forward. It's not as serious as you might be making it out to be. Yes, there's repercussions and risks and all of that fun stuff. But actually, if we can really strip it back to these fundamental layers, it becomes less overwhelming.
Yeah.
And that's the secret, quote unquote, to getting into flow is really reducing overwhelm, reducing cognitive load, aka how much we have to think about whatever it is that we're doing. You think back to our best swim performances, often they were a result of we showed up and almost like put in the DVD player and hit play. And
Right.
then it was like, okay, I don't even remember what was going on in my head during those things. It just was on tape, it automatic, because we didn't have to think about it. So
Mhm.
those are like two huge things that really are super tangible for anyone that might be struggling with literally anything right now. If you're trying to make a behavior change, take a step back and be like, okay, cool. Am I feeling overwhelmed? If so, yes. If yes, then how do we reduce that? How do we make it so there's less things to think about? What's that? A really simple, easy first step, and go from there. And then flow starts to creep into our life.
Yeah, the idea of flow is so like that. Who is that guy? I can't pronounce his name. um
Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and I definitely butchered that last name, but yeah, he's the godfather of flow on everything. I have his books back here.
yeah.
Amazing to see. I think his research came out, I want to say in like the 70s,
Hmm.
70s or 80s. And then it's really transformed and evolved over time here. It's been fascinating.
It is. Can you talk a little bit more about flow and how that has influenced your business as well as your time as a swimmer?
100%. When I found his work, I was like, oh my God, this is this is exactly what I've been seeking. Like I've been seeking kind of this roadmap to feel how I would feel in swimming and when everything clicks. So for really definition's sake, flow is when we become so locked in on whatever it is, the task in front of us, everything else around us just doesn't matter. Some might call it like tunnel vision, but we're just locked in focus. And focus is what fuels flow, ironically. And in that space, hard work becomes easy or becomes easier. So we feel like we can actually stretch and do more than otherwise we would be able to. And then time seems to warp a little bit. Either it goes by really, really fast or it goes by really slow. It's kind of this, it depends on the person type deal. You know what I mean? It's the amount of times that I swam a mile and I really found flow and it felt like I blinked, but really it was 16 or 15 minutes condensed
Mhm.
into what felt like maybe a minute or two type deal is pretty wild. So when I started to understand, okay, this is a state of being that we can get into. How do I now get into it for myself again? What are different ways that help me find that? And how can I start just recreating that? And once I found a blueprint that was really working for me, I took really what has worked and done a ton of research on it, and now have just started tweaking and throwing that in, sprinkling that in with people that I've been working with. I'm like, hey, like, try this. If you're having trouble focusing, like, try this out. This might help out. We're gonna reduce the number of apps on your phone, on your home screen, so you can just like lock in on work for a second. Or we're gonna put parameters and boundaries on your calendar so that you know, all right, from 2 to 3 right now, I'm sitting down with you and we're recording podcast. And then at 3, I'm gonna shift gears, but on my calendar, instead of just saying work in there, again, cognitive load, right? I want to decrease it. So instead of just having work block, it's broken down. These are the 2 to 3 tasks that I need to get done in those 3 hour or in that hour of work, whatever that may be. And I can get like super gritty with it. And I'll probably, if oftentimes really the biggest thing, if I know this is going to sound like all over the place, the biggest thing for people trying to get into flow is a result of what we call the challenge skills ratio. And we have to balance the two. So when you're highly skilled, say you've been a swimmer for 18 years of your life, you can show up to a meet, you need a certain level of challenge to find flow there. It's probably like you got to be racing the big boys and girls at that meet. That's where you're going to find flow. If you showed up and you've been swimming for 18 years and you're pretty solid, pretty skilled, and you notice that you're racing 8-year-olds, you'd probably be like, okay, like I got this in the bag, no problem. You're probably going to be a little bit apathetic towards it and just be like, all right, I got the job done. But the odds of you actually going your best lifetime best time very low. On the flip side, right, if you're 8 years old and you found yourself in that situation, swimming at someone who's 18, 19, 20 years old, and be, oh my gosh, what am I doing? This is pretty scary. We're overwhelmed. We're anxious. We start to, be on the other side of that challenge skills balance. So there's a sweet spot that exists. And then really, if we can cultivate a level of self-awareness, strip the ego away, right? When we're talking about skills, oftentimes athletes, I love all of us, but we can be very biased towards our own skills. We think we are better than we are at some things occasionally.
Yeah.
We need to be realistic within ourselves and be like, okay, cool. This is where I'm at on a skill level. Now let's find a corresponding challenge that feels a little bit stretchy, but not too stretchy. It doesn't feel like I'm a nervous excited rather than anxious excited, or anxious nervous, I would say.
Yeah.
So fine tuning that is really the secret sauce.
It's that balance too. And I think of that chart. I've seen that chart before where it's like challenges here or skill or wherever it is, side by side. And that something could be boring if you don't have enough challenge and more skill. And just what you're saying, like if you're that 18-year-old racing 8-year-olds. I really want to jump into, and I haven't heard this full story, and I don't know how many people have, but when you started Forever Athlete, how did the name come about? And where did you find yourself in that? Like, when did you start finding flow in what you're doing? Because right now, I feel like, based on what you're posting on Instagram and your TikToks, and you're really in a flow of what you're doing. So I just want to hear a little bit more about that.
I appreciate that. I don't feel like I've been in flow just because my life has been in flux the past month here. But yeah, I am finding my lane, and my confidence has been building in that process. Really behind the name itself, what I found was really I got tired of just accepting verbally from other people like how I should be living my life. I was like, wait a second. Who says I have to be a former athlete? Like, why did we, like, there is a mourning, grieving period that happens for all athletes when that formal uh, career ends, whatever that looks like. However, that doesn't mean that your whole self worth, identity, and who you are gets boxed away with the medals that you then put in your parents' basement. And that's what I felt when I heard the word former athlete. I was like, does that mean like I can't be athletic anymore? Like I can't go try new things. I can't try a new sport. I can't go learn something. No, that doesn't, but it didn't feel empowering to me. It felt really limited. It felt like I was boxing myself in quite literally. So I just thought, well, what's something that is unlimited potential? It's limitless to it forever. Okay, cool. Now, like forever athlete just makes sense. And then when I started to identify as that personally and then started putting that out there to people, a lot of other athletes were like, oh my God, that's like such a simple shift, but that is really powerful. Like this has helped me. Like I've made a turnaround from, weight was going up on the scale to now I'm losing 10, 20, 30 pounds, 50 pounds even. Like people are starting to find their groove. And that's what I love about it is it can mean something different for everyone, which makes it really hard to talk about. But what Forever Athlete means to me could be different for you and different for everyone that's listening in right now. And that's okay. I want to empower people to feel like they can just create a life that is theirs, whatever that may look like. And it's going to be looking different for everyone. Um, and then for my own process, really,
If I
it
can
is just,
jump in really quick.
yeah,
I would love to know because I have an idea of what forever athlete means to me. Because I've been thinking a lot about this. What does it mean to you? And then I could jump in and share, and maybe that can get some heads rolling for other people to think.
I love it.
Putting you on the spot here.
No, I should be able to define it like that, right? Um, to me, it means always growing forward. So finding different ways to grow and understanding that with growth, there will be periods where just like a plant reaches the limits of its environment within a pot. It might have to be uprooted and repotted into a new plant. It might struggle a little bit in that process, but ultimately, in the long run, it's going to be better off. That's kind of the imagery that I hear when I think of Forever Athlete. I think of all of the things. It's not just the good, it's the frustrations, it's the challenges, and really it's a community of other people that share so much similarity that they can come together and just be like, whatever you need, I got you. Let's help one another out. We're all in the same team here.
Awesome.
I'd be
When
curious to
you,
hear your
yeah,
definition.
when you talked about the pots, I'm like, do you see all my plants in my room? I love
I
plants. But
see that.
so right, I'm gonna
I need
use
to
that
get
metaphor.
more.
Yes. I very similarly, but I think being an athlete, as much as it is like, the sport that you are doing, I really think it's a mindset. And it's a mindset
Mhm.
of the growth. But for me, it's the mindset of learning and being willing to try new things. Just like when I was a kid, I learned how to swim butterfly or swim breaststroke. That was brand new to me when I was 8 years old. And now, I'm doing these other things like I started mountain biking. If For me, if I didn't learn those things when I was a kid of how to, understand my fear level, but also push past it, but not push past it to where I'm going to get injured, I don't
Mhm.
know that I would be the same person trying out all these things that I'm doing right now athletically. And kind of going along with that, I really do think, and it's something that I'm reminding myself that, just because I competed when I was a kid, and that's what makes you an athlete if you're competing in a game or a sport, it doesn't mean that you still can't be an athlete when you're, hiking a mountain. I just went for a big hike yesterday. I was talking with some of the guys I was hiking with, and they're like, we have to remind ourselves we're not just trying to rush to the top, we're not trying to win the hike, but you can still take that athletic mindset and the athletic, strength and power you have to be able to do these things. So, yeah, I think our definitions definitely, bounce off each other, but
I'd
definitely
be
the learning piece for me.
I'd be curious with your hike. Like, did the thought ever, you said it was a big hike, did the thought ever come into your mind that you would turn around 3/4 of the way and be like, "Ah, well, we just, like, didn't make it, so, like, we'll be good."
There
Or
was definitely a point where it was actually when we were coming down, because I'm not as good at descending down as I
Mhm.
am like going up. I'm like, okay, like I got this. And coming down, I was like, oh man, like, am I gonna make it? But I do think that through the times that I struggled in swimming, or, I remember there was a set in college and we were doing 200s breaststroke. And there was like a point where I'm like, I don't know that I can do another one. It's knowing how much to push your body.
Mm,
So yes, there's those thoughts, just like everyone has those thoughts of, do you think I can do this, finish it? But I think as athletes and growing up, you learn so much of what your body is capable of. And it's so cool to see what you can do, beside your sport,
yeah.
beside just swimming, so
I love that you said you didn't wanna win the hike, like, you weren't
yeah.
just gonna go out there, I think that's an important thing to remember in that transitional phase, and even while you're in it, right? Like, there are a
Right.
handful of athletes that I work with now that are current. They're sophomores going to be rising juniors in college, both on swim teams, and one of the things that has really helped them out was, one, like, for context, they were navigating burnout and feeling just overwhelmed, and you know it. You and I both know how long that college swim season is. It's brutal. You get there late August, early September, and you pretty much swim the entire year. Like, it stops in early March, but then depending on where you go to school, it becomes optional, quote unquote. And then you still got to keep going. And it's natural, obviously, the longer that you do anything, for it to come up at some point that you're trying to navigate some feeling of burnout. And one of the biggest solutions that you can have for it is, one, assessing where it is coming from. Like, is it because you're feeling undervalued, or is it because you're feeling a lack of progress towards a certain goal? What is it? And once you identify the source of it, the root of it, you look at, well, what can I change personally? What can I change about the situation? And is there anything that I can change about my relationship to the situation? Can I maybe take a step back for a second, talk with some coaches, whatever that may be? And one of the things that we found to be really helpful is actually encouraging them to get back to the roots and be like, my favorite question to people is, what did you really enjoy when you were like 10 years old? Why'd you stop doing that? Probably because you got too busy, work, it wasn't cool anymore, whatever it may be. I say, okay, cool, great, go out and do that again. So for one person, that's figure skating, and he's been getting out and like going ice skating once, twice a week. And would you know it, after a few months of that, all of a sudden, like, he actually looks forward to practice again and is excited to go to the pool. And a lot of it is because we've taken the pressure off the pool and given him another outlet that he can go and find flow as well. So he's not just dependent on the one thing. And the fascinating thing about flow is the more flow you get, the more flow you get. It's not exclusive to
Mhm.
one thing if we don't allow it to be. But if we're only trying and putting all our focus and energy on that one thing, then yeah, life's gonna be really tough when that one thing's not going well. And that's what I learned over the past few years here.
No, totally. I remember in college too, like I was all about swimming. I mean, I walked onto the team and I wasn't on scholarship, but it was, I did these other things, but it was like swimming, swimming, swimming. I got to get better. I got to get better.
Mhm.
And even though I wasn't making it to the conference meets, I wasn't, earning points for our team, I still loved it. But then afterward, I'm like, I don't want to get back in the pool. So I love that you're talking about what is that other thing, even if you're still competing, that you
Mm.
can find to do. Because I think, and I was re-listening to the podcast I did with Amanda Pressgraves, the first one I ever did for Rise and Shine, and she talked about, you know, actually, if we're just pushing, 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 and only focusing on one thing, we're going to do way worse than if we let ourselves, open up. And that's a hard thing for athletes, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, we got to just go, go, go. So, yeah.
Yeah, the pause is, like, just missing oftentimes. And,
Yeah.
to athletes' defense too, especially in the college level and beyond, like, you're thrown into a condition and an environment that isn't really conducive to pausing and taking your time, right? Like
Mhm.
Delaware is a mid-major. It wasn't like a top-notch D1
Right.
program for sure. But even still, it felt like those days where we had a morning practice and an afternoon practice, pretty much everything was like automatic and just rolled before we knew it, we blinked. It's like, oh my gosh, now I have to study. I have to study for what? This stinks. Um, and what I wish I knew then, which I think will be really extremely helpful for your listeners, is flow comes in a four-part cycle. And as much as we try to do it, we can't short circuit the cycle. Like it always follows this map, so to speak. And it always starts with struggle. And in struggle is when we develop new skills. So anytime we pick up something new, it could be trying to draw something, it could be trying to learn how to public speak or start a podcast or pick up a new skill and a drill at practice. It can oftentimes be a struggle. The trick is knowing that one, struggle is important, and two, we want to be able to flirt with frustration, but we don't want to become so familiar and like tied to it. And that's the Achilles heel to so many athletes is we say we can be really stubborn, right? We start to get frustrated with the process and we think our default is, well, I'm just going to put my foot further down on the gas and I need to power through this. But what the science shows is when you truly reach a point of frustration, what you should do is take a step back. That moves you into that second phase of the flow cycle, which is a release. Oftentimes, that is, in some practice, why the bathroom break is programmed when it is for us. You know what I mean? You get to
Yeah.
do your warm up, you do a little preset. It's maybe a little bit challenging. It could be maybe a drill that you get frustrated with. And then lo and behold, you got a 2, 3 minute bathroom break. It's very intentional. That's there because then you have flow on the other side of the release. That's the third part is the actual flow itself. That's the good stuff. That's where you and I and everyone listening probably wants to try to live. Unfortunately, it's often fleeting and it's short lived. But when we come out of it, it's very high energy, both physically and cognitively. It takes a lot of brain power. So we need to make sure we're giving our body and mind ample time to recover on the flip side of that. And then that's the fourth stage, recovery. And then if you do that right, you're all set up, you're good to go, you're geared up to go to struggle.
Mhm.
And where athletes and high achievers fall into oftentimes, their downfall is they just try to go back and forth between struggle and flow, struggle, flow. And it's like an on off switch. It's not the case. It doesn't exist without those two are the most important, which is why you'll see me saying oftentimes, like, you got to slow down and speed up. You got to, like, if you want to become a faster runner, it sucks, but you gotta go and run miles that are like 2 minutes, 3 minutes slower than what you would like to do pacing wise. Just like in swimming, same thing, right? If every single yard that we swam was at all out sprint effort, we would be so burnt out
Yeah.
and just beat up. So that's what I would hopefully leave the listeners with, a little roadmap there. Start to understand and look at when you look at that cycle, look at what you're doing on a day-to-day basis within like an hour period or 2 hour period. And how can you set up those 2 hours to follow that cycle? That's what I've done with the away games, the retreats that I host.
Mhm.
It's literally all built, it's a neuroscience experiment that I'm playing and no one else, well, now they'll know, but no one else really knows when they show up. They're just like, oh my God, this like itinerary is great. It's like, yeah, it's all neuroscience backed. It's very intentional to have this event here and then this break and then this event here and then this break. And like, that's what we're following. And that's what at the end, I'm like, hey, so you can actually live every day of your life like this if you choose. Up to you.
Right. Not just go, 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 but scheduling in those breaks. And the last thing I want to leave on too that you just mentioned, and it's kind of crazy because I was gonna ask this, and then you're like, away games. Talk a little bit about the community aspect. So you do the one-on-one coaching, but I feel like the community, every time you post, I wanted to go to the last one and I was like, darn it, like it's not gonna work. But how has that been with, getting everyone together who are forever athletes and really, teaching them things, but also letting them connect?
Yeah, I mean, it's twofold, right? It's what I learned very early on is I'm a fantastic facilitator. And yes, I can throw information and coach you and throw that into there. But some of my favorite things, like last night, for example, we threw a mental meals event in 5 cities at once. It's pretty wild to think. Like, I was thinking about it as the day was going on. I'm moving all of my stuff into a brand new apartment the same day that I'm trying to orchestrate 5 events across the country. And what I found was it was really cool at the Austin one that I hosted. I brought all the people together, and then after 2 hours, the conversation was still flowing. I was like, I would really love to just stay in this community, in this conversation. There's a lot of things that I still need to take care of at my apartment. And I had no problem just saying, guys, thank you so much for coming. Like, I have to run, but please, like, stay as long as you'd like. We were at a restaurant. I was like, just keep chatting. And I just walked away like the biggest smile on my face because I have no idea how long they stayed there, but there was a live band and music and they were just dancing, having a good time. I was like, cool, this is great. That's what I find really so much joy in is just connecting people through that and then being able to step away and just letting that magic take place afterwards. I can't force people to connect. I can only encourage them and increase the likelihood that it happens.
I don't know about you all, but I know I learned so much from this podcast. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was the metaphor of plants. As you can see, I love plants. The thing about it is that we outgrow our spaces that we live in, and we're always growing and we're always changing. Thank you again to Cory, the founder of Forever Athlete. If you want to learn more about Forever Athlete, you can visit forever-athlete.com. And as always, this is a Rise Athletes podcast. To learn more about Rise Athletes, visit rise-athletes.com. We have both individual coaching, our mind power coaching, as well as coaching for teams. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us on social media, Rise Athletes, or email us at riseathletes.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you have a spectacular day.